All right, let's talk about one of the most unbelievable, most audacious secret plans of the entire Cold War. Now, I know this sounds like something straight out of a vintage sci-fi movie, but believe me, for a brief moment in history, this was a very, very real project. Yep, you heard that correctly. The world's two biggest superpowers were in a dead sprint to be the first to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon. And this wasn't some fringe idea from a crazy general. Nope. This was a classified military study, and it involved some of the sharpest minds of the time. So, the big question is, why? Why on earth would they want to do this? Well, to really get it, you have to transport yourself back in time, right into the thick of the Cold War. We're talking about a level of paranoia and rivalry that is kind of hard to imagine today. You see, for both the US and the Soviets, a lunar explosion was the ultimate flex. This wasn't really about a tactical military advantage, it was all about psychological warfare. The goal was to stage a spectacle so huge, so terrifying, that it would completely demoralize the rival on a global stage. It was a way to shout to the entire world, look what we can do, we are in charge. And the plan was so specific, it's chilling. They were going to use a hydrogen bomb way, way more powerful than what was used in World War II. And get this, they planned to detonate it right on the Terminator line. You know, that moving edge between the sunlit side and the dark side of the moon. Why there? So the blast would be perfectly backlit against the blackness of space, creating a flash so bright that anyone looking up, especially from, say, Moscow, could see it with their own eyes. And because there's no atmosphere on the moon, there'd be no mushroom cloud. Just a silent, brilliant, terrifying flash. So scaring the Soviets was definitely a big part of it, but that was only half the story. When you actually dig into the declassified files, you find something else. This raw military power play was cleverly disguised as a massive, groundbreaking scientific experiment. And here it is, the actual cover of the report. The title itself, A Study of Lunar Research Flights, tells you everything. You see, the scientists on the project, which, by the way, included a very young Carl Sagan, they saw this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So let's put the geopolitics aside for a second. What were the huge scientific questions that the team thought they could answer by setting off a nuke on the moon? For the scientists involved, this was about so much more than a flash in the sky. They saw this as a unique chance to do some revolutionary lunar science. The report is just jam-packed with detailed plans for experiments that could solve some of the most fundamental mysteries about our closest celestial neighbor.
Okay, so maybe the biggest scientific goal of all was to finally figure out what the moon is actually made of on the inside.
You know how on Earth we study the seismic waves from earthquakes to map out everything, our crust, our mantle, our core. Well, the moon doesn't really have earthquakes. It's pretty quiet. So the plan for Project A119 was, let's just say, brutally simple. If there's no moonquakes, we'll just have to make one. A really, really big one. The idea was that the nuclear explosion would send these incredibly powerful shock waves vibrating through the entire moon. It would literally ring the moon like a giant bell. And by placing seismographs on the surface beforehand, scientists back on Earth could basically listen in. They could track how those waves traveled, how they bent, how they bounced off different layers. It was basically a planetary-scale ultrasound. And this really shows you just how ambitious the science was here. With just one single blast, they could have answered questions that astronomers had been arguing about for centuries. Does the moon have a core like Earth? Is it liquid or solid? How thick is the crust? One violent experiment could have completely rewritten the textbooks. But wait, it gets even wilder. The project's ambitions went even further than geology. An entire chapter of the report is dedicated to a really profound question. Could life, or at least the basic building blocks of life, exist on the moon? The scientists came up with this really fascinating theory. They thought that billions of years ago, the moon might have had a thin, temporary atmosphere. And in that atmosphere, the sun's radiation could have cooked up simple organic molecules. We're talking the precursors to life. Then these molecules would have settled onto the surface, and over eons, they'd get buried by a constant shower of meteoric dust, which would protect them from all that harsh radiation. The report even estimated how much could be there. They calculated there could be up to 10 grams of this prebiotic stuff for every square centimeter of the lunar surface, just waiting to be found. Now, that may not sound like a lot,
but scientifically speaking, that is a potential treasure trove.
So how does a nuke help you find it? Well, the incredible heat from the blast would instantly vaporize tons of that buried material, kicking up this massive cloud. Then, telescopes back on Earth could analyze the light shining through that cloud. It's a technique called spectroscopy, and it would let them look for the telltale chemical fingerprints of those organic molecules. I mean, what a long shot, but can you imagine if it had worked? The first discovery of organic matter beyond Earth?
But here's the crucial twist. Even as they were drawing up these incredibly ambitious plans, the scientists themselves knew they were playing with fire. They recognized the huge risks of their own experiment. They knew this was a massive double-edged sword. Sure, the blast could reveal the moon's greatest secrets, but it could also permanently contaminate it with radiation. It could introduce microbes from Earth. And in the ultimate irony, it could completely destroy the very pristine geological or organic evidence they were hoping to find in the first place. In the end, and thankfully, someone decided to hit the brakes. The U.S. Air Force canceled the whole thing in 1959. The risk of a massive public backlash if the mission failed, plus the very real danger of ruining the moon for any future, less explosive science, it was just too high a price to pay. The desire to preserve the moon won out. Project A119 is still one of the wildest what-if stories of the entire space race. It's this incredible snapshot of the time, of the ambition, the fear, and the terrifying power they had. And it leaves us with a question that scientists still grapple with today. What's the real price of knowledge? Especially when the experiment itself might destroy the very thing you're trying to understand.